Recording in progress. Yes. All please rise. Be seated, everyone. Number 5, you were the foreperson of this jury. And is it correct that the jurors answered each and every interrogatory that was put to them?
Yes.
And it's also true that some of the jurors have offered some comments in addition to answers to the interrogatories.
Yes.
Very well. I do have that copy. It appears to be signed by all of the jurors, and it is in the appropriate order. And as soon as I am finished reading a portion of it, it will be filed. Interrogatory number 1. On June 18th at approximately 8:55 a.m. did Charleena Lyles call 911 to report a burglary at her apartment? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Seattle Police Department officers Anderson, the Police Department officer Anderson arrive at Ms. Lyles' apartment building in response to her call to 911? 6 jurors answered yes. Upon arrival, did Officer Anderson review an officer safety caution notice arising from an incident at Ms. Lyles' apartment on June 5th, 2017? And 6 jurors answered yes. Did the officer safety caution notice advise Officer Anderson that on June 5, 2017, Ms. Lyles had threatened officers with a knife? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Anderson review police reports arising from an incident at Ms. Lyles' apartment on June 5, 2017? 6 jurors answered yes. Did the police report advise Officer Anderson that on June 5, 2017, Ms. Lyles had threatened officers with a large pair of scissors? 6 jurors answered yes. Did the police report suggest to Officer Anderson that on June 5, 2017, Ms. Lyles exhibited symptoms consistent with mental instability and delusions? 6 jurors answered yes. Was Officer Anderson alerted by police reports from the June 5, 2017 incident that Ms. Lyles might exhibit symptoms of mental instability and delusions on June 18, 2017? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Anderson request a backup officer because of what he read about the June 5, 2017 incident? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Mcnew respond to the call for backup officer and arrive at Ms. Lyles' apartment building? 6 jurors answered yes. Was Officer Mcnew certified as a crisis intervention trained officer, CIT officer? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Anderson discuss what he learned about the June 5, 2017 incident with Officer Mcnew before approaching Ms. Lyles' apartment building? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Mcnew ask Officer Anderson if Ms. Lyles had a mental caution? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Anderson respond no? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Anderson's description of the June 5, 2017 incident cause Officer Mcnew to be aware that on June 5, 2017, Ms. Lyles exhibited symptoms consistent with mental instability and delusions? 6 jurors answered yes. Was Officer Mcnew alerted by Officer Anderson's description of the June 5, 2017 incident that Ms. Lyles might exhibit symptoms of mental instability and delusions on June 18, 2017? 4 jurors answered yes. 2 jurors answered unknown. Before they entered the apartment, did the officers make a plan that after they entered the apartment, they would not allow Ms. Lyles to get behind them? 6 jurors answered yes. Before they entered the apartment, did the officers also make a plan that after they entered the apartment, they would not allow Ms. Lyles to get between them and the door? 6 jurors answered unknown. Was the plan based in whole or in part on the officers' awareness that Ms. Lyles had threatened officers with a large pair of scissors on June 5, 2017? 6 jurors answered yes. Was the plan based in whole or in part on the officers' awareness that Ms. Lyles had exhibited symptoms consistent with mental instability and delusions on June 5, 2017? 3 jurors answered yes. 1 juror answered no. 2 jurors answered unknown. Did Ms. Lyles allow the officers entry into her apartment? 6 jurors answered yes. Was Ms. Lyles wearing a knee-length down coat when the officers entered the apartment? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Anderson see an infant and a young child in the living room after he entered? 5 jurors answered yes. 1 juror answered unknown. Did Officer Mcnew see an infant and a young child in the living room after he entered? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Ms. Lyles point out where the reported stolen property had been taken from the living room? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Ms. Lyles lead the officers to the back bedroom and point out from where the reported stolen property had been taken? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Ms. Lyles lead the officers back to the kitchen area of the apartment? 6 jurors answered yes. During the course of the interaction with Ms. Lyles, did Officer Anderson observe Ms. Lyles moving her hands in and out of her pockets? 6 jurors answered yes. During the course of his interaction with Ms. Lyles, did Officer Mcnew observe Ms. Lyles moving her hands in and out of her coat pocket? 5 jurors answered yes. 1 juror answered unknown. Did Officer Anderson ask Ms. Lyles to stop putting her hands in her pockets? 4 jurors answered no. 2 jurors answered unknown. Did Officer Mcnew ask Ms. Lyles to stop putting her hands in her pockets? 5 jurors answered no. 1 juror answered unknown. After returning to the kitchen area of the apartment, did Ms. Lyles stand near the living room side of the end of the peninsula counter? 6 jurors answered yes. After returning to the kitchen area of the apartment, did Officer Anderson stand near the kitchen side of the end of the peninsula counter? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Mcnew take a position inside the kitchen to Officer Anderson's right? 6 jurors answered yes. Were there several knives visible at various places on both kitchen counters? 5 jurors answered yes. 1 juror answered unknown. Did Officer Anderson see the knives on the counters? 4 jurors answered no. 2 jurors answered unknown. Did Officer Mcnew see the knives on the counters? 4 jurors answered no. 2 jurors answered unknown. Was Ms. Lyles calmly and clearly answering questions from both Officer Anderson and Officer Mcnew about the burglary? 6 jurors answered yes as to both officers. Was Officer Anderson taking notes and unable to maintain constant eye contact with Ms. Lyles? 6 jurors answered yes. While Officer Anderson was talking to Ms. Lyles, was Officer Mcnew observing Ms. Lyles? 5 jurors answered yes. 1 juror answered no. While Officer Anderson was talking to Ms. Lyles at the end of the peninsula, was there a time that Officer Mcnew turned away from Officer Anderson and Ms. Lyles? 6 jurors answered yes. While Officer Mcnew was turned away from Officer Anderson and Ms. Lyles, was he able to see them? 6 jurors answered no. Did Ms. Lyles' demeanor suddenly change from cooperative to hostile and threatening? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Ms. Lyles suddenly display a knife in her right hand? 6 jurors answered yes. Prior to Ms. Lyles' display of a knife, did Officer Anderson reasonably believe that Ms. Lyles did not pose a threat to the officers? 4 jurors answered yes. 2 jurors answered unknown. Prior to Ms. Lyles' display of a knife, did Officer Mcnew reasonably believe that Ms. Lyles did not pose a threat to the officers? 4 jurors answered yes. 2 jurors answered unknown. Did Ms. Lyles suddenly thrust a knife towards Officer Anderson's abdomen? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Anderson jump back to the pantry door to avoid being stabbed? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Anderson then move to the entryway to his left to get offline of Ms. Lyles' attack? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Mcnew see Ms. Lyles display a knife and thrust it at Officer Anderson? 3 jurors answered no. 3 jurors answered unknown. Did the knife in Ms. Lyles' hand contact Officer Anderson? 6 jurors answered no. Did Officer Anderson get on the radio and request backup? 5 jurors answered yes. 1 juror answered unknown. Did Officer Anderson draw his firearm and order Ms. Lyles to get back? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Ms. Lyles comply with Officer Anderson's order to get back and step back toward the living room side of the apartment? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Mcnew see any part of this interaction between Officer Anderson and Ms. Lyles? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Ms. Lyles then turn toward Officer Mcnew from the living room side of the kitchen peninsula? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Mcnew get on the radio, report a woman armed with 2 knives, and request help? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Ms. Lyles raise a knife over her head with her right hand? 3 jurors answered yes. 3 jurors answered unknown. Did Officer Mcnew believe that Ms. Lyles was going to throw the knife at him from the living room side of the kitchen peninsula? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Mcnew duck down to avoid the knife if it was thrown at him? 6 jurors answered yes. When Officer Mcnew next observed Ms. Lyles, was she holding 2 knives, 1 in each hand? 3 jurors answered yes. 3 jurors answered unknown. When Officer Mcnew drew his firearm, did Officer Anderson also have his firearm pointed at Ms. Lyles? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Ms. Lyles say no to the officers, or say to the officers words to the effect, "Do it"? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Mcnew yell to Officer Anderson, "Taser"? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Ms. Lyles say to the officers words to the effect of, "You can't do that either, motherfuckers"? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Officer Anderson respond that he didn't have a taser? 6 jurors answered yes. Did Ms. Lyles move along the edge of the peninsula on the living room side, mirroring Officer Mcnew's movements on the kitchen side of the peninsula? 1 juror answered yes. 5 jurors answered unknown. Did Ms. Lyles move along the edge of the peninsula on the living room side towards Officer Mcnew? 6 jurors answered yes. As she moved towards Officer Mcnew, was Ms. Lyles holding a knife, holding 1 knife in each hand, pointed at Officer Mcnew? 2 jurors answered yes. 4 jurors answered unknown. After Ms. Lyles had begun approaching Officer Mcnew, could he move out of the kitchen without getting within lunging distance of Ms. Lyles? 5 jurors answered no. 1 juror answered unknown. Did Ms. Lyles comply with Officer Mcnew's order to get back? 5 jurors said no. 1 juror responded unknown. Did Officer Mcnew draw his firearm and point it at Ms. Lyles? 6 jurors responded yes. Did Officer Anderson fire his handgun 4 times at Ms. Lyles? 6 jurors responded yes. After Officer Anderson first ordered Ms. Lyles to get back, did he give Ms. Lyles any additional orders to get back before he fired his handgun? 6 jurors responded yes. Did Officer Mcnew fire his handgun 3 times at Ms. Lyles? 6 jurors responded yes. Did Officer Mcnew give multiple orders to Ms. Lyles to get back before he fired his handgun? 6 jurors responded yes. After Ms. Lyles' initial compliance with Officer Anderson's order to get back, did Ms. Lyles comply with any additional orders to get back? 4 jurors responded no. 2 jurors responded unknown. From the time Ms. Lyles displayed a knife until just after shots were fired, were Officer Anderson and Officer Mcnew able to see each other? 6 jurors responded no. At the time Officer Anderson fired his handgun, was he aware of where in the living room Ms. Lyles' children were? 3 jurors responded yes. 2 responded no. 1 responded unknown. At the time Officer Mcnew fired his handgun, was he aware of where in the living room Ms. Lyles' children were? 3 jurors responded yes. 2 responded no. 1 responded unknown. Did Officer Mcnew announce over the radio within seconds of shots being fired that Ms. Lyles was down and medics were needed? 6 jurors responded yes. At the time Officer Anderson and Officer Mcnew fired their handguns, was either child in the living room at risk of being struck by a bullet? 2 jurors responded yes, 4 jurors responded unknown. At the time shots were fired, was the front door to Ms. Lyles' apartment open? 6 jurors responded yes. When Officer Anderson shot his firearm at Ms. Lyles, was he standing in the open doorway of Ms. Lyles' apartment? 6 jurors responded yes. When Officer Anderson shot his firearm at Ms. Lyles, was he standing in the hallway outside of Ms. Lyles' apartment? 1 juror responded yes, 4 responded no, 1 responded unknown. Did Officer Anderson verbally warn Ms. Lyles, Officer Mcnew, or others present that he was about to fire his handgun? 6 jurors responded no. Did Officer Anderson defer shooting a reasonable amount of time to allow Ms. Lyles, Officer Mcnew, or others present to heed the warning? 4 jurors responded yes, 1 no, 1 unknown. Did Officer Anderson believe that giving a verbal warning would compromise the safety of himself or others? 3 jurors responded yes, 1 no, 2 unknown. Did Officer Mcnew verbally warn Ms. Lyles, Officer Anderson, or others present that he was about to fire his handgun? 6 jurors responded no. Did Officer Mcnew defer shooting a reasonable amount of time to allow Ms. Lyles, Officer Anderson, or others present to heed the warning? 4 jurors responded yes. 1 juror responded no. 1 juror responded unknown. Did Officer Mcnew believe that giving a verbal warning would compromise the safety of himself or others? 3 jurors responded yes. 1 no. 2 unknown. Would a taser have been a reasonably effective alternative to the deadly force used by Officers Anderson and Mcnew? 6 jurors responded no. At the time Officer Anderson or Officer Mcnew fired his handgun at Ms. Lyles, did it appear that a reasonably effective alternative to the use of deadly force existed? 6 jurors responded no as to each officer. Was the amount of force used by Officer Anderson or Officer Mcnew reasonable to affect the lawful purpose intended as defined in instruction numbers 11 and 12? 6 jurors responded yes as to each officer. Did the bullets fired by Officer Anderson and Officer Mcnew strike Ms. Lyles? 6 jurors responded yes as to each officer. Did Officer Anderson and Officer Mcnew request or render medical aid for Ms. Lyles as soon as reasonably possible? 6 jurors responded yes as to each officer. Did Charleena Lyles die in Seattle, King County, Washington on June 18, 2017? 6 jurors responded yes. Was Ms. Lyles' death the result of the use of deadly force against her by Officer Anderson or Officer Mcnew? 6 jurors responded yes as to each officer. The next interrogatories are about SPD policies and training. As to the policies regarding bias-free policing, the use of force, de-escalation, and crisis intervention, all 6 jurors found that those policies apply and that the policies and trainings as to those policies were complied with except as follows. Interrogatory number 111. Did SPD policy 8.300-POL-3 use of force, conducted electrical weapons or tasers, section 3, apply to the actions of Officer Anderson in this incident? 6 jurors responded yes. If you found that that policy applied to the actions of Officer Anderson during the course of this incident, did he comply with the policy? 6 jurors responded no. Did Officer Anderson comply with the training as to this policy? 6 jurors responded no. Did SPD policy 8.300 POL-4-use of force-firearm section 7 apply to Officer Anderson or Officer Mcnew in this incident. 6 jurors responded yes as to each officer. Did the officers comply with that policy? 4 jurors responded yes as to Officer Anderson and Officer Mcnew. 1 juror responded no as to each officer. 1 juror responded unknown as to each officer. Were the officers' action consistent with their training as to that policy? 4 jurors responded yes as to each officer. 2 jurors responded unknown as to each officer. That is the reading of the verdict of the jurors. The verdict will be accepted along with the comments that have been submitted by the jurors. And ladies and gentlemen, that will conclude your service. And I want to thank you, and I'll have a chance, I hope, to come upstairs and chat with you briefly before you leave to talk to you a little bit more about your service and talk to you about your experience, and you can offer me additional comments then if you wish as well. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we are at recess. Jury is excused.
All please rise. Fuck both of you. Kill my daughter for nothing. Fuck both of you.
Mister,
I don't give a fuck.
I understand that, but I'm gonna have to ask you to leave this time.
I'm gonna leave, but fuck them. You know?
Thank you, sir.
Administrator?
Yes.
Are
You don't have to answer up to somebody. You gotta answer up to God.
Are you intentionally not reading the interrogatories on page 18?
That was fine. Apologize for that.
I'll get that.
That's okay. Go and see. The question for the jurors was, if you found that Officer Anderson or Officer Mcnew's use of deadly force caused the death of, if you found that Officer Anderson's or Officer Mcnew's use of deadly force caused the death of Charleena Lyles, was the use of deadly force by that officer justifiable as defined in instructions number 11 and 12? 6 jurors responded yes as to each officer, and that concluded the interrogatories.
How many pages of comments are there?
Several.
Are there enough that you can read it? Family and here would like to know what the comments are.
Yeah. Probably about 20 pages, 15 or 12 pages. I think they've been, we can ask Matt when he gets down there, but I think they've been uploaded already. Or they're about to be uploaded. He's already copied them and they're ready to be uploaded the moment he gets back, so they can see them all.
All right.
Okay. Again, I apologize for my error for not reading that last one. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Administrator, are we, observers going to?
I'm